Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Yes, I'm back. Business first, so as you may have noticed, the videos are still fairly inconsistent. I did say I was coming back and videos would become regular. As is the way of things, unfortunately, I have found it difficult to be as consistent as I have been before. I'm going to try and resume the videos, but I'm not going to make the promise again that I'm going to go back to the daily videos just yet. We'll see. It's a very play-by-ear situation, depending on work commitments and other such offline commitments right now. But I'm going to try and at least, you know, as I watch films, I'm going to continue to make videos. It would be nice to catch up and do the 365th video by the end of the year. As time passes, that seems unlikely, but we'll see. And of course, we'll get to the end of the year, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do with the channel yet. I haven't decided. But anyway, that's where I'm at. But I couldn't, of course, skip a Marvel film, because as well as the Marvel rewatch, which is something else I will be resuming, there are new Marvel Cinematic Universe films being released throughout this year. Of course, earlier this year I talked about Black Widow, and later on, around Christmas time, we'll have No Way Home. But nestled in amongst it is the very strange beast that is the Eternals. And to be honest, the journey of the Eternals is already so odd that by the time we get to the actual discussion of the film itself and the viewing of the film, I was in a very odd place with it. Because, I mean, it's not like the Eternals are a completely unknown team, but they were definitely in the spirit of Guardians of the Galaxy, as in, Marvel were clearly looking at their roster. And obviously there are heroes that they haven't used yet who are well known. You know, we have rumblings of characters like She-Hulk, Blade, Moon Knight. All of these things are coming very quickly. But I think Marvel, especially when Guardians was such a success, really got a taste for the idea of characters and teams and groups who, frankly, people don't really know much about. Even die-hard Marvel Comics fans don't really know much about them. And that, therefore, they can really write the rule book. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy in the comics was not the Guardians that we saw in the James Gunn films until the James Gunn films came out, and then the comics started to reflect the films. And similarly, the Eternals are... It's not that nobody knew who the Eternals were. They were a name that existed. Jack Kirby, of course, created the Eternals because Jack Kirby famously had a love and passion for grand Greek and Roman dynasty mythology storytelling, you know, sort of Ovid's Metamorphosis styles of story, where we have ageless gods, you know, dealing with matters that are beyond human and yet are at the same time are so operatic in a very human way. You know, so that's how we ended up with the New Gods and Darkseid and all that stuff for DC. But then when he came back to Marvel, after they refused to let him do that kind of storytelling the first time, he created the Eternals. And the Eternals were psychedelic and weird and, like I say, spanning and all about these ageless gods who aren't really superheroes. They're not traditional superhero storytelling. They are, as I say, they are very Zeus and Hera and Hercules and that kind of storytelling of these grand beings living either amongst us or sort of above us. Very Jack Kirby, basically. Then you had Neil Gaiman about 2 decades later. I think another team picked it up in the 80s, but I don't know much about that. But then Neil Gaiman, of course, picked it up in the 90s or early noughties. And of course he went very Neil Gaiman with it, which of course also a lover of grand mythology, but in a more modern, with a more modern sensibility with it. So of course he found a way to integrate the Eternals into Marvel Comics a bit, current storylines, but also make it very the world underneath our world, very Neverwhere, very Good Omens, very Neil Gaiman style, you know, Sandman. The same thing with his Sandman. It's that whole thing of parallels and the idea that these beings, who again, are they heroes or are they not? It's unclear. They've got their own stuff they're dealing with. They live amongst us, but almost separate. And again, it's very Neil Gaiman. It very much fits his oeuvre. But again, very indie. I can't say I knew much about it until I did a fair share of research. And it's not well known, even amongst comic fans. This isn't the level where, you know, Thor, people didn't really know much about Thor, but there had been decades of Thor comics. This was a group who there wasn't that much, and the stuff that was had a very small fan base. And so when they announced for the MCU that they were going to do an Eternals film, it was one of those head-tilting things, partly because the MCU had stayed, even, you know, into Endgame and Infinity War and Endgame, had stayed fairly grounded. We had the space stuff, but then we had the Earth stuff, and there wasn't that sense of, there was a little overlap, but you got that sense of, okay, if we're dealing with a street level character, it's you know, Iron Man style, it's Captain America style. If it's cosmic and crazy, we're talking Guardians. And obviously with Shang-Chi, they've started to try and bridge that gap. But the Eternals is the point where they're saying, no, magic has always existed in our world. This isn't like a Thor, magic is science we don't understand. This is like the next level of that. This is like eldritch gods who are unfeeling, unsympathetic. They have no understanding of humanity, shifting the cosmic spheres of the universe style of storytelling, which is just next level. And so going in, it is that weird thing with the Eternals, where it's like, well, what could this be? How can this fit into the Marvel landscape? What will this look like? Will this be a Guardian situation where they'll clear the board and just go, we're doing our own version, our own thing? It was a strange one, and it's been a strange one. And then, of course, they brought Chloe Zhao on to direct. And again, it was a weird choice, because, admittedly, I will say now, my knowledge of Chloe Zhao, as I probably said during my Nomadland video, beyond Nomadland, I am not particularly aware of her filmography and her style. And Nomadland is such a indie sensibility to it, and has such a certain style that absolutely wouldn't fit a franchise movie of any kind, that whatever she was going to do with the MCU was not going to be anything like Nomadland. And so this was a curiosity, and the trailers didn't help. I remember that the first trailer was bad. It was just actively bad. I watched it and thought, what is this film? It looks so dull and lifeless, and there's no sense of plot, there's no sense of character. It just feels like sort of picturesque shots without any meaning to them. And then the second trailer came out, and okay, there was a bit more going on. It felt a little bit more familiar to the MCU, but again, it felt different. And different didn't necessarily mean bad. Because for a long time, people have been saying, oh, the MCU is formulaic, it's the same structures and story styles over and over and over again. No matter who's directing, it feels like we are just on a cycle of exactly the same story modes. That being granted, you know, the ethos, I think, behind the Eternals was, let's do something completely different. Let's really push the boat out. And so I come to see it, and it's a curious film, because, okay, the one thing I will credit is it doesn't feel like an MCU. Different people, you know, reviewers I follow have said, well, some have said, oh, it feels very different from an MCU. Some have said it feels like an MCU film. I'm in the camp that it does feel different. You know, like, and parts of it definitely feel like they're in their own universe. Like, if you were to take all the MCU stuff out and just make it its own independent superhero, or whatever you want to call it, you know, mythology, high fantasy storytelling, film, it doesn't. The text and the style doesn't necessarily feel MCU-esque. Maybe with Kumail Nanjiani, maybe a little, but not. Only on the most superficial of level. It definitely feels like it's trying something different. And I suppose the positives of it, as I say, is the ambition. You know, it's quite clear that Chloe Zhao wanted to do this grand scale that lived up to the sense of gods and monsters, the sense of grand high fantasy mythology, where it's high fantasy not because it's within the fantasy genre, but because it's so far beyond. It's not, like I say, science you don't understand. This is like the next level of that, where it's like, oh, this is science we could never conceive of. It's so beyond us. Like I say, gods moving the spheres of the universe style. And she wanted to live up to that and create that sense of scale to it and mythology. And the thing which everyone's been talking about is, you know, and the concern is the fact that this is also, from a production standpoint, an incredibly diverse cast. You know, we have, you know, they absolutely went, like, yeah, we're going to have a diversity of ethnicity, we're going to have a disabled actress playing a disabled character, which, you know, is, as a disabled person myself, is hugely, should be credited for, you know, again, the inclusivity within the industry. The fact that they have an LGBTQ plus a relationship, no, it's not just a character, but we see a couple, and they don't do the thing which they've done in the past where they've either inferred it or they've made reference to, like, someone has referenced their sexuality. This is explicitly a gay couple in a happy relationship. And again, that should be applauded. You know, and you get that sense, like I say, so you have the scale, you have the ambition, you have the diversity and the sense of inclusivity. And in spite of all of that, the film is such a hot mess. It's unbelievable. Because it really struggles with its identity. It really doesn't know how to tell this story about this group. It doesn't fully understand who its protagonist is. I mean, broad strokes speaking, you know, I mean, it's a hit the sort of the basic premise, of course. So we have the Eternals, who are otherworldly beings who look like humans, but they're not. They live for 7,000 years. They've lived amongst us. They can't interfere except for fighting creatures known as deviants, which are like monstrous dragon-like looking, sort of gargoyle-style looking creatures. And though they think they defeated the deviants many centuries ago, it looks like they're coming back. And then on top of that, there are all these machinations and politics of their group. People have fallen out, people have made up, revelations are made, you know, there are consequences, and it's all very, like I say, it's all very classic Greek god storytelling styles. And broadly speaking, as I say, it doesn't, identity-wise, it doesn't... Okay, the first problem is, who is the protagonist? Now, from a basic standpoint, Gemma Chan, Cersei, is the protagonist. She's sort of our intro character. She's sort of the heart of the team. She takes on a leadership style role when a character is lost. She is our protagonist, and yet, and Gemma Chan is a very good actress. You know, Gemma Chan. You know, I've been following Gemma Chan's career since Bad Education, Humans. You know, she's an actress who I'm very well aware of her ability and range. But they do that thing which, of course, I've talked about before, which is they need the protagonist to be fairly, not to not have a personality, but they need to be fairly neutral, because if your protagonist is neutral, it means anyone can identify with them, or anyone can empathise with someone because they're not too overly complicated. And frankly, that means that she's very wooden. And again, it's not Gemma Chan's fault, because I know she has the capability, but the way that she's directed is very dry, very wooden. You get moments of emotion, but it all feels like it's been like neutralized in some way, as if she's having to like repress, any real sense of like emotional expression. And there is the argument to be made that maybe something that, because it's a common problem amongst the characters that they are several. Richard Madden, you could throw that at. The actress who plays Sprite, you could throw that at. You could make the case that they're all, they all seem to have this sort of stilted wooden thing, and maybe it's supposed to symbolise the fact that they are these ageless gods, who live for millennia and sort of aren't human, even though they look human. But it's inconsistent. It doesn't feel that there are huge inconsistencies in that respect, because sometimes it does feel like they're normal people. You have characters like Michael Tyree Henry, who feels like a normal person, or Kumail Nanjiani, who again feels like a normal person. And there are points where even the characters who are the more stoic, wooden-feeling ones break that and do the sort of slightly more marvelly humour to it. And so the problem is, it's all very wooden, and you have Gemma Chan there, and it just doesn't... I have no reason to emotionally connect to her. But then it also has that problem of it shifts. So even though she's the protagonist, theoretically, as soon as we're introduced to the group, we have all of these characters. We have Icarus played by Richard Madden, we have Sprite, we have... their names are endless, and Athena played by Angelina Jolie, and Gilgamesh, and there's about 8-10 characters, and it's just way too much because the focus is just lost. It's just, we're jumping from all of the needs of all of these characters. We're introduced to them. We're given complex backstories for them, where they've been all these centuries, where they're at now emotionally, what their drives are, and it feels ill-paced. And you couldn't say, well, maybe a team like that, it's too big. And, well, firstly, it is way too big a team to start with. If you look at something like Justice League, that only had a team of, what was it, Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, 6. Guardians of the Galaxy had a team of 5. This has a team of, I think, 9 at the most. Now, admittedly, characters disappear, some unfortunate events happen to other characters, but it's ill-paced in that respect, because then, you get introduced to a character and you think, okay, we're going to spend some time with this character. Oh, no, they're gone for a while. Angelina Jolie, and I really think her character and her casting is one of the weirder ones, because she's Angelina Jolie. She is a top-billed actress. And yet, they don't quite know... She disappears for whole stretches of the film. And when she is there, there's something about her performance. Again, I don't know whether it's how Chloe Zhao chose to direct it, or whether it's how Jolie has chosen to try and emulate this character, or whether she just isn't engaged with the material. I don't know. But she just... even though she has this quite complex emotional arc about the fact that she's suffering from this condition that's affecting her mind, she honestly feels like she's checked out for long stretches of the film, and it just... And like I say, this whole stoic, unemotional thing means that we struggle to connect with most of these characters. The exceptions being, like I say, Kumail Nanjiani, who brings the humour, and there is a sense of sort of humanity, for lack of a better term, to him, and the fact that he has this valet/documentarian, and they have a really humorous and yet emotional relationship at times. And Michael Tyree Henry, who again, because he has a family and stake, you kind of get where he's coming from. There are points where his character, I do feel... I have other issues, and I'll get onto that in a second, but you understand at least emotionally where he's coming from. But so many of them are so dull, because there's just no... There's no, depth to the performance. Or if there is, it's so dense you can't get to it, and it feels stilted and emotionless. And like I say, you get to the other issue where it comes to like characters like, because but like I say, there's supposed to be these ageless gods. Some of them really embody that. Someone like Richard Madden embodies that. He actually tries to, there is something quite stoic and ageless because, of course, he's a Scotsman. You think, well, he'd have that accent because he's thousands of years old, and maybe, he developed the accent while living amongst the Celts, even though we hear it from before then. But you can justify it in however way you want. And you have someone like the guy who plays Druig, the Irish guy. Similarly, he has this sort of stoic way about him, his speech. But even their line readings, they feel like the way they speak could exist in any time period. But like I say, you have the actress who plays Sprite. You have Michael Tyree Henry, whose character's name I've forgotten, Fastus. You have Camille Nanjiani. And even though there is more emotionality to some of them, because they've got these like American accents, and they speak like modern people, and they use like slang, and that would be okay in the modern day. You could say, well, maybe living amongst people, that's just what happens. But they have those same cadences and those same colloquialisms in the flashbacks, and so you go, well, it's weird. It's weird that the writing on this is weird. The dialogue is weird because it feels like there's an inconsistency there. And then, of course, you just get to the actual story aspects of it, and the pacing is all over the place because you've got this huge cast of characters, because you've got all these moving pieces and betrayals and certain, and you think you know who the villain is, and then I'm not going to spoil it, but it's obviously trying to do that thing of, not everything is not as black and white as you expect. But because this is a long film, this is 2 hours and 45 minutes, and there are stretches where you're just spending with these characters, trying to adapt to them and their dynamics, and trying to go, okay, this is what they're like together. And the pacing is all over the place. It is all over the place. It really moves at a snail's pace at certain points, and then rushes through exposition and drops tons of information at other points. And it's I don't know, it's a difficult one, because it's not unwatchable, and there are moments that are good. I can see the ambition behind it, and I can see interesting aspects of the storytelling. But there are points where it's so dull and so lifeless. And then there's the MCU aspect of it, which honestly I think is one of the biggest issues. Because as I said, it's trying to have a different tone and style. Man, this does not feel like it fits into the MCU. It's trying so the problem is it's trying to fit into the lore of the MCU, and it's so essentially tied to like the fundamentals of MCU storytelling, with the Celestials and the forming of the universe and humanity and our place in it, that it's essential reading, you might say. This is not something you can kind of go, well, we'll skip it and just pretend it doesn't exist. It really struggles because anytime they drop MCU things, anytime they reference the MCU, you think, wait, this exists in that world. And even though they say the thing, it's like, well, why weren't you involved with Thanos? And they say, oh, because we're not allowed to, because of deviants. For plot reasons, partly, that doesn't make sense. And also, it's so flimsy because of times when they do interfere, and you think there's just no consistency. And it doesn't feel like it's in the same world as the MCU. It doesn't feel like it fit in the same world as Doctor Strange or Iron Man. And you even think about the fundamentals of certain plot beats, and you think, well, how does that work? How can that work in the MCU? How can that work? How can this be important if Doctor Strange doesn't know about it, or this, how will this affect, all of these things? And it's, honestly, I genuinely don't know when it comes to the grander plan of the MCU. I don't understand how this is going to play out, and I don't know how this is going to fit in, because the things that are usually pleasurable Easter eggs hurt the franchise in a way that's going to really bring up major questions. And then it does annoying things like it obviously is doing the groundwork for future MCU films. Kit Harington's character, Dane Whitman, who comic fans, and I'll drop this because comic fans would know it, and okay, mild spoilers I suppose, that character is the Black Knight. And you think he's going to be part of the narrative, that this is going to be almost like a prequel to maybe his character's film. He's introduced at the beginning and then disappears. He's not part of the film in any meaningful way. And that's cheap. It's really cheap and lazy, and again, it's ill-paced because they establish his character and then they just drop him. And that's the problem with this film. It just doesn't know how to balance the characters. It doesn't know who to focus on. It doesn't know, like... And it does look beautiful. I'll give it that. Chloe Zhao, does give you these beautiful landscapes, and the history stuff looks grand, and the space stuff with the Celestials looks cosmic and cool. But I do wonder whether Chloe Zhao is... There are two kinds of directors. An actor's director and a cinematographer or cinema visual director. And so therefore some directors really want to work with their actors to tell story through character, and it's about characters. And yes, the visuals might still be good, but they're very much about what kind of performances can I get out of them. And there are some directors who are very much about, almost how do I make these visuals as beautiful and picturesque as to the point where you can take an image and turn it into a painting. And I feel like Chloe Zhao, as is demonstrated with Nomadland, is that kind of director. And it's not that she can't, Nomadland demonstrates that she knows how to do good character stories, but I think she's interested in expression through visual landscape. And I just think this needed someone who, like a James Gunn, who's much more into characters and quips and relationships. And I just... Honestly, this film is such a shame because it has... where it lands, it is not Thor the Dark World bad, which is to me still the least good Marvel film. But it's not good. It's definitely in the bottom half, and I still need to sit on where I place it, but this is not... It's not good. It's not a film where I look forward to seeing the characters coming back. There are plot strands that I'm interested in, but I'm interested in them being expressed or explored through other characters. And I just, honestly, it's not one I would particularly relish going back to, partly because of the running time, partly just because it's not that interesting. And it's a shame. It's a really big shame, and it'll be interesting to see going forwards what this means, how this affects the sequels, how it affects the MCU and all the things it's set up, because it has swung for the fences. But I'm really not sure what this means in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, thank you for joining me. So if you like this video, hit the like button, comment below and share the video, because this all helps me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.